Hey guys, so I wish I could tell you that justice has prevailed since lesson 10, but unfortunately, it continues to disturbingly fail, at least in the literal sense. If you want to talk karmic justice, well, that's up for debate. Now, I'm not going to recap everything. It's complex and we're nearing that 1 year mark, but I really do encourage you to listen to lesson 10 if you haven't already, if you want to know the premise of this case and what's led up to this. But the very short version, my case started as a tenant-landlord dispute after my former landlord, Anna DeSantis of DeSantis Rentals, misrepresented her property. The city of Raleigh confirmed this when they found 14 housing code violations. But ever since, my pursuit of justice has been met with obstruction and now what I believe is a system-wide coordination across agencies, courts, and judges, to which I have documented proof. Now, I've done my best to keep an updated log and timeline on my website, and you're going to find that link below. When I left off last, I was battling the district court, which tried to interfere with my interlocutory appeal, and the Court of Appeals was supporting it. Now, this theme has continued to push me into filing a Section 1983 claim in federal court, which of course has its own set of challenges. But with each violation, the more determined I became to understand why. And what I found was a breakdown so serious, I believe that it could lead to hundreds of cases being reopened and possibly even criminal charges in the Court of Appeals. They have been aggressively trying to conceal this, which is why the retaliation has escalated. Now, this also led me to uncover unauthorized charges being made that could add up into the thousands of dollars that have no official oversight. Now, I understand how serious these claims are. I do not make them lightly. But I'm going to walk you through exactly what I've discovered, and you can decide for yourself. And as I publish this video, I will also be sending my letter to the North Carolina Senate and House Judiciary Committees, reporting on what I found and demanding an investigation. But you know what? That's not even the craziest part. Now, what if I told you I actually predicted this over 2 years ago under hypnosis? Now, I actually have this recorded, so I'm not just making this up. But during a QHHT session, which is quantum hypnosis healing technique, in November of 2022, I said I was going to make a major discovery in 2025 and that I would be forced to learn so much that I was going to suffer and I wasn't going to like it. I would be in a city on the East Coast. Now, at the time, I was living in Colorado and I did not know when I would be planning on moving, of course, and that it wouldn't involve my job. It would be something I would be doing on the side. I would have to be patient because it would create a ripple effect. One thing would lead to another, to another, to another. And this discovery will cause chaos. And I will be forced to prove something, and people aren't going to like it. Now, I never said exactly what it was because I said if I did, no one would believe me, and I had to go through the process on my own to get me here. Now, at the time, and honestly, for the last 2 years, I'm like, what is this discovery? And I kept thinking it was going to be in genetics research because that was the direction I was heading in. But now I realize, well, I was a little bit wrong on that one, and it's definitely this case and what I've uncovered in the Court of Appeals. This case has unraveled just as I described. I mean, I was right. This discovery will cause chaos because what is happening here is systemic and it's very dangerous. I mean, there has to be a reason this state is being called out right now. Maybe it's because what's happening here is rippling far beyond North Carolina. I mean, due process is being threatened across the country. And how one state handles it absolutely influences the actions of others on a national and even global scale. Don't believe me? Well, what if I told you that one case out of Virginia in 1927 helped justify Hitler's vision of the so-called perfect race, something that North Carolina was involved with as well? Allow me to present my case, which I promise is not as long this time. Part 2, as I share with you how I discovered this and what I believe is truly happening within the North Carolina judicial system. But before I go any further, I have to make my official disclaimer. I am not an attorney. Nothing in this video should be taken as legal advice. If you are going through something similar or have questions about your own situation, I highly encourage you to consult a licensed attorney. Now, everything that I am sharing is my personal experience, the evidence that I've gathered, and my interpretation of it. These are my opinions and my claims that I've filed lawsuits and formal complaints based on this information, but none of it has been proven in a court of law yet, largely because I haven't been given the opportunity. So while I attest to these things that I'm stating are true, until the courts agree, it's important to remember that everyone is innocent until proven guilty under the law. At the end of the last lesson, I explained that the Court of Appeals granted an improper motion filed by Mr. Yap, the opposing counsel. It was so far outside the rules that I had no choice but to file a petition for discretionary review with the Supreme Court. But I want to explain why that motion was improper, because unless you've been through the process or read the rules, it's hard to grasp how serious it was. Now, my appeal shows on the record that the trial court or district court of Wake County acted improperly and that my rights were violated. I have the evidence to prove that, all of which is included in something called the Record on Appeal. Without it, my case is nothing. Mr. Yap has been fighting to strip that record down, to erase any mentions of rights violations, and to make it look like I'm just appealing pretrial rulings, which normally, of course, aren't immediately appealable. The timeline in filing an appeal is very strict. Each step is laid out by a rule that has usually been held up through case law, except in very rare or extreme circumstances. Opposing counsel gets 30 days to object to a proposed record on appeal from the day of service. That is it. Now, Mr. Yap missed that deadline for objections. That means by rule, they can't be included. Until the record is officially docketed by me, jurisdiction still belongs to the trial court. So anything that happens with that proposed record on appeal has to be decided in district court. That's clearly stated in the rules and backed up by case law. Yet, Mr. Yap filed in the Court of Appeals asking them to force me to accept his objections as timely or grant him a retroactive extension. Now, he cited Rule 11B, 11C, 27C2, and 27D, but none of those actually govern how service is handled, which he claimed I did improperly. He claimed that he still had time because of a 3-day mailing extension. But that only applies when the proposed record is physically mailed. I served it through him through Odyssey, the district court's electronic service system. That means service is exact. You do not get any extra days. Rule 5B of the North Carolina Rules of Civil Procedure make that very clear. But the appellate court does not use an electronic service system. You can serve it through email or physically mailing, and you automatically get 3 extra days no matter what. So he was citing appellate rules for a trial court or district court jurisdiction. Now, as for retroactive extensions, that can be granted under Rule 27C2, but not for a proposed record. Rule 11 sets very strict deadlines. If you miss it, you're out. There is nothing in the rules anywhere that authorizes the Court of Appeals to rewrite that deadline after it passes, especially when the case hasn't even been docketed. So if he had filed in trial court, he would have been late. Now, this obviously should have been stricken, like I requested in my objection. Yet, the Court of Appeals granted it, citing that they were timely served, but failed to cite the rule that governed it, and no judge identified. It just has the clerk of the appellate court's signature. But doing that, these judges were acting outside their jurisdiction and interfering directly with my appellate rights and my constitutional rights, because they were bypassing proper authority, ignoring due process, and purposely delaying my case. So Mr. Yap used that improper order to request judicial settlement, which is when a judge gets involved in the proposed record on appeal and has to say what's fact and what's not. But they are not allowed to remove anything from your record. It's basically just factual statements, which his objections didn't even qualify as. But you see, I pointed out that that appellate order was improper when I objected to Yap's request for judicial settlement. The trial court still had jurisdiction. It does not matter if the Court of Appeals is higher than the trial court. It's who has jurisdiction over it. Judge Eagles, who was assigned to this, had the authority and obligation under judicial canons to correct the appellate court's error, but she didn't. Instead, she used it as well, saying that she had to follow it. But maybe that's exactly why what happened next happened. So 2 days later, after I posted my last lesson, I was still waiting for Judge Eagles' ruling on the record settlement. She said on the docket that she would issue it by April 29th. But instead of an order, I get an email, not from her, but from Mr. Yap. He reached out claiming that things had gotten out of hand, and of course, blaming me for that. He said the case was taking a toll on Anna just as much as it was on me, and asked what I would like to make this end. Now, that email landed in my inbox before the close of business, and still no ruling from Judge Eagles. To me, that said everything. They were worried. Whether it was pressure from my last lesson or the weight of the record, they wanted to avoid scrutiny. But here's the thing. If you're going to de-escalate, do not send me a gaslighting email pretending that we are on equal footing, because we are not. Anna has subjected me to a year almost here of gaslighting, false accusation, character attacks. weaponized legal tactics. She has infected a judicial system used by thousands of tenants and pro se litigants across the state. I have an obligation to see this through, not just to protect my rights, but to stand up for everyone else who doesn't have the means or the voice to fight back. Yeah, they didn't like that answer. So Mr. Yap retaliated by filing a very disturbing response to my petition for discretionary review with the Supreme Court, one that was clearly meant for it to get denied, which it did, but it was chock full of lies. He claimed that both the trial court and the Court of Appeals had already dismissed my appeal. I'm sorry, what? Like, I haven't even filed it yet. Where does he get off saying that? So, of course, I file a motion for ex parte temporary restraining order in the district court, not because I expected it to get granted, but to preserve the record. And I also filed with the Court of Appeals, asking them to go on record to state what he had wrote was untrue. Now, according again to Judicial Canyons, if an attorney's misconduct is brought to a judge's attention, the judge is required to address it. I said Yaps suggested one of two things. Either he had insider information and he knew that they were planning on dismissing my appeal, or he was just flat out lying and misrepresenting the court. Either way, they had an obligation to rebut it. If the court does not distance itself from that kind of misrepresentation, it looks like collusion. Silence in that context is still consent. Yet they denied me again. Now, every part of my body was screaming like something is really wrong here. Now, the first time, maybe you can chalk it up to a coincidence, a one-off error. Even a second time, maybe a procedural sloppiness. But a third time, in coordination with an altered trial court docket showcasing these denials. Now, at a certain point, coincidence stops being random and it starts being a pattern. Now, let me break this down to you really simple. Now, let's say that a bad motion or a bad ruling has something like 1 in 100 chance of happening. That's rare, but it's not impossible. Now, stack another event, also with a 1 in 100 chance. But both of them favor the same person or outcome. Well, that 1 in 100 chance has now turned into 1 in 10,000 chances. And then at a third one on top of that, you're looking at 1 in a million. In statistics, this is called non-random clustering. It means the odds of these events all happening independently are so low that the only logical conclusion is that they're all connected. Whether that's through bias, network influence, or something more intentional, there is a common variable linking it all. And I was determined to find out what it was. The first thing I needed to figure out was, all right, who are the judges actually issuing these orders? So let's talk about how the appellate court is supposed to work. Because when you file an appeal or a petition, your case goes to a panel of appellate judges, usually 3. They review the filings. Now, depending on the case, they will issue a full opinion that names the judges, explains the reasoning, cites the law, all of it. But not every decision gets that, of course. Now, on motions, some rulings just come as very short orders, just a line or two. And that's normal. But what's not normal is not knowing who ruled at all. Most appellate courts still list which judges were on the panel, even if there's no full opinion. At the very least, you get the initials or some kind of dissent note or that access to that information usually on the docket. But in North Carolina, you have to formally request the names through the clerk. And under both state and constitutional law, they're required to release them. Now let's talk about that clerk. Because like most appellate courts, North Carolina only has 1. That part is not unusual. But what is unusual is how much unchecked power this one person has with zero transparency. The clerk doesn't just process paperwork. He is the gatekeeper. Every motion, every deadline, every order flows through him. He controls what gets seen by who and when. And in North Carolina, he signs all of these short orders. Each one says, by order of the court, sitting as a 3-judge panel. But the only name on the entire document, Eugene H. Soar, Clerk of Court. That's a lot of power for one person, especially when that person can block access to the judge's names, which is exactly what he did. He claimed that they don't release the names on motion orders and told me I would need to get a court order or even file a federal complaint just to get them. Now, this directly contradicts public access laws, so I filed a formal records request with the administrator of courts. But they responded back and said that the Court of Appeals is the sole custodian and I have to go through them. Now, meanwhile, Judge Eagle's order for the judicial settlement still was due by May 6th under the appellate rule. But guess what? May 6th came and no order. And that is straight up crazy. I searched everywhere. I could not find one single case of this happening before in North Carolina. a judge just refusing to rule. My guess is that they thought maybe it would lock me into some kind of procedural stalemate, but I wasn't just going to sit around. I filed a notice of judicial inaction stating that I'm still going to file my record under appeal under Rule 11B as the original schedule still stood. Right on cue, Mr. Yap retaliated. He filed another motion in the Court of Appeals acting as defense counsel for Judge Eagles, asking again for a retroactive extension on the judicial settlement order. Okay, again, there's no rule that allows this, not under Rule 11C, and especially not 30 days after the deadline for objections. Also, he is not counsel for the court. That alone is a huge violation of professional conduct. But here's where it gets really weird, because when he filed his motion at the exact same time it was accepted into the electronic docket, I received some anonymous email from the Court of Appeals that says, please see the below press release for information regarding the 90-day delay in the releasing of the judges' names who ruled on a petition filed in the Court of Appeals. The names of judges ruling on motions are not released. This came from a no reply address, no name, no way to respond, just a link to a press release from 3 years ago about a 90-day delay on petitions, but it stated nothing about motions. Now, press releases are not law. They're not rules. They're not even policy. So I immediately called the Court of Appeals. I'm like, all right, who sent this email? And the woman denied it. It came from them. She said this sounded like spam, not to click on the link and just to completely ignore it because they would never send an email anonymously. But still no word from Eugene Soar. So I called again. The moment he picked up, I recognized the voice and I realized that, okay, I've spoken to you quite a few times. I followed up about the judges' names and he just went completely hostile. He's like, did you not get your answer? So he admitted sending it and claimed that this was standard procedure. And when I asked him what law allowed him to uphold the name, he told me to go find one. I said, yeah, okay, I did. It's called the North Carolina Public Access Law and it requires that you give me those names. He didn't care. He said, if I wanted them, then I would have to mail in a letter, which directly contradicts the public records law. He was so hostile and angry and aggressive. I kept asking him, like, why are you so angry with me? I'm like, this is my right. What is your problem? And then he said, well, I don't have a problem. You have the problem because you don't like the answer. And I was like, I just hung up because I was like, you are just wasting my energy right now, especially since I've already found articles where appellate judges' names were published before these motion rulings even came out. So clearly this policy isn't real. But you know what? One thing that I do know is in human behavior. I have studied it extensively, both academically and intuitively as a human design reader. And I can tell you, people do not get that aggressive, especially in a professional setting, unless they are afraid. Something that they are defensive to because they need to protect it. So I started digging. Turns out Mr. Soar has been with the Court of Appeals since 2007. That is 2 decades at the Court of Appeals. He was appointed clerk of courts in July of 2021 by unanimous vote of all the judges. That means he has some pretty strong pull. Now he's worked as a law clerk, a staff attorney, and now he, of course, is the main man in charge. He knows every corner of that courthouse, and I guarantee you every procedural loophole. And now Mr. Yap also clerked at the Court of Appeals between 2017 and 2017. So not only did they know each other, but they likely worked directly together. In addition, one of the judges he clerked for is still on the bench. So I was like, I wonder how much favoritism this man's gotten in the Court of Appeals. So I pulled the record from Yap's past appellate cases. In 2022, Yap filed a motion for an extension on the proposed record in another case. Now this would be allowed, but he did not get permission from the trial court first. Again, he skipped it and the Court of Appeals granted it before opposing counsel could even respond. Now that attorney in that case filed a formal notice of bad faith on Yap and called out the court for acting out of his authority. Now, while that attorney didn't push back further like I did, probably because they know that they didn't want to risk future scrutiny, it just shows that this has happened before. So this isn't just a one-off. And the common thread is Mr. Soar and Mr. Yap. But if Soar has done this for him, I imagine he's done it for many others. So between the multiple improper orders, 2 different cases, Soar's long-term history, refusing to release the names, and his aggressive attitude, this to me only whittles down to 3 possibilities. That 1, the court is allowing Soar to make rulings on motions without full judicial review, meaning he's going to them and saying, hey, my 3 judges today, I have this motion for extension. This is a common extension. I'm just going to grant it. Cool, you guys good with it? Sure, sign off on it. We're good. And they never really even look at the motion. 2, Soar is assigning the same judges over and over again that would rule in Yap's favor or whatever attorney he's doing a favor for, maybe even the one that Yap clerked for, which of course would be a conflict of interest. Or number 3, he is issuing rulings without the judges even knowing about it. Any one of these 3, though, is something called fraud upon the court. So without those names, I can't prove which one it is, and it shields him and the entire system from exposure. But while this was going on, Yap's motion still hadn't been ruled on. So on May 12th, I docketed the second record on appeal, again, this time under Rule 11B with a notice of improper rejection. Later on that afternoon, I checked the trial court docket, and weirdly, there was these 3 separate orders issued from Judge Eagles in the early morning that I never got notified to. The first was just a stamped denial of my ex parte TRO that took her 12 days to rule on. No explanation, no nothing, which is super improper, but okay, no surprise there. The second order only said order to strike, which they spelled strike wrong. Now, at first, I thought that this was her saying that she was striking my TRO, like she made up something to justify that she denied it, that I did something wrong, but I couldn't access it. It wouldn't I couldn't click on it, it wouldn't download. And I'm like, what is going on? It was like locked, which was something I had not experienced before. And then the next one was a certificate of service stating that this order that I couldn't click on had been mailed not to my current address, which the court absolutely has because it's mailed things to me since, but to the old address, the very first one that I haven't even lived at in almost a year, that Presley Court address. I don't even have mail forwarded from there anymore. Not only that, but it was also mailed to Anna, not even Mr. Yap. Okay, none of that makes sense. What is going on? I immediately emailed the trial court administrator asking for a copy. Now, under court policy, they are required to send me an electronic copy, but she deflected and says that she's going to have the issuing clerks handle it because they're the ones that did it. No response before the court closed for the day. Then, exactly after closing at 5:01 p.m., Court of Appeals is closed. I get an order stating that Mr. Yap's motion for his retroactive extension has been granted. No governing rule cited, of course, just an 11-day extension. This is the 4th improper ruling. Like, what is going on? Now, at this point, I filed a motion for judicial transparency, formally requesting the names of the judges who ruled on all of these filings. Since apparently they wanted a written request, okay, fine, there you go. It's been on the record. Now, the next day, I follow up with the clerks, because still hadn't heard from them, and Yap casually says, oh, you know what? I think it was probably about striking your supplemental record on the appeal. And I immediately asked, I'm sorry, how do you know that? That's not on the docket. No one told me that. So unless you have insider access, there's no way you could have known. Well, then the clerk finally replies and sends me a link stating that I can get this from the e-court docket, stating that it's been there the whole entire time. No, it hadn't. All right. I had filed 2 complaints in between this time. Do not gaslight me. So gross. Then Yap chimes back in, now claiming that, well, I knew because I saw it on the docket. I'm like, please, if that was true, you would have just said so from the start, but you didn't. You guessed because he already knew. And when I got access to it, he was right. It struck my entire supplemental record without any explanation, and then I had to remove references to the term ex parte. None of this is allowed by a judge. Not to mention that order was withheld, though. She issued it at 9:36 a.m., and it was locked down until after the Court of Appeals granted Yap's motion, which means the trial court knew it was coming. That's improper coordination between the courts, ex parte communication, or even worse. Oh, and remember that motion I filed for judicial transparency? I stated very clearly that if the court denied it, they would have to cite the legal grounds or it'd be in violation of the public access law. They didn't. They instead dismissed it. No legal grounding, right alongside rejecting my second attempt to docket the record on appeal. I was basically left with no choice. I had to file a Section 1983 complaint, which is a federal civil rights lawsuit. This is not easy. Only 3% of pro se litigants win this case. Great. My odds are definitely not in my favor. But it lets you sue state officials who violate your constitutional rights acting under color of law. That includes judges, clerks, and yes, even attorneys when they are effectively acting as state actors. Now, I couldn't obviously include the anonymous judges from the appellate rulings because I still didn't know their names. So I had to list them as John Does for now. Then I named Judge Eagles, Judge Walczek, Judge Davian, Eugene Soar, and Mr. Yap. And then I laid out 27 distinct violations over 50 pages, everything from due process violations to obstruction of justice. I also filed an ex parte motion for temporary restraining order, asking the federal court to stay my appeal and order the Court of Appeals to release the names of the judges. Mr. Soar himself told me that's what I had to do, then that's what I was going to do. But I also had to decide where to file it, either Eastern or Middle District, because technically I live in Middle District, so I can file there. And that's where Anna's fair housing complaint that I've also filed is pending. But all the defendants live in the Eastern District. So that's where I filed, paying the $405 for my rights being violated. I love that. But when I went to go and file the claim, even the clerks kind of seemed uneasy about it. They kept asking me, like, more than once, why wasn't I filing in Middle District? Like, I feel like they were kind of warning me with outright saying it. But when I told them my reasoning, they even called to confirm that I could file in the Middle District. They said, I'm here, I'm going to do it. I believe that they're going to do the right thing. This is the federal court. They have to follow the Constitution. Well, that was my mistake. But the reason why I had to file in person is because pro se litigants in federal court have to request permission to file electronically. They think that they're doing us a favor because they claim that Pacer is just so difficult to manage. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know how to use the website. I've used Odyssey. I've used the filing for the Office of Administrative Hearings. I've built my own website. I have managed multiple cases entirely on my own. But sure, I'm sure it's super hard. Now, Judge James Dever III took a full 5 days to deny my emergency TRO and claimed that my complaint wasn't based on any real violations, that I was just upset about the rulings. Seriously? But then he strangely called out Mr. Yop individually, suggesting that I only included him because he was just simply opposing counsel, which makes no sense because if I was going to do that, wouldn't I have also named Frank McGraw, who is the original attorney in this case? I mean, I haven't yet. We'll see what happens. But he didn't address my request for the judicial order to release the names of the appellate judges, and he denied my request for electronic filing without even giving a reason. So I was like, cool, at this point, this court isn't going to be fair either. So I had to voluntarily withdraw my complaint, drive 2 hours out of my day to Middle District, pay another $405 for my rights being violated. Now, unfortunately, the court doesn't give refunds when the judge doesn't do his job or engages in misconduct, because I believe that Judge Dever did. Because guess what? I found out he teaches at Campbell Law School, the same law school that Mr. Yop attended. Now, he teaches core courses that Yop likely took. So, and they work within a couple of blocks vicinity of each other for the past 10 years? You telling me they don't know each other? Please. Again, coincidences. So I filed a judicial complaint against, of course, Judge Dever with the Fourth Circuit. Then, as if that wasn't enough, I finally got a ruling from the Office of Administrative Hearings on my contested petition case, the one against the North Carolina Human Relations Commissions, because I've been waiting for 45 days for her to rule on my motion for summary judgment, but she didn't. She dismissed the petition case in no whatsoever legal grounding. I mean, it was a complete joke. Like, I was actually embarrassed for her. It was just a full-blown character smear. She used my state case as a reason for the dismissal, which is irrelevant and has no legal basis in this. But here's the biggest red flag. She mentioned the Eastern District federal filing, a case that was never served, and I filed ex parte, meaning nobody should have known about it. So she either was snooping through Pacer, improperly investigating me with a violation of the Fourth Amendment, or someone named in the complaint got tipped off and told her. Now, I gave administrative law Judge Turntine 2 chances to fix her ruling. I told her plainly, if she didn't correct it based on actual law and facts, I would add her to my 1983 complaint. In addition, I demanded that she stated on the record how she found out about my Eastern District filing when it was never served. Now, this is, of course, they want to take that as a threat. It's not a threat. It's a promise grounded in law. I'm giving you the opportunity to do the right thing, to stand by the oath that you took. If you want to continue violating my 14th Amendment, my due process rights, you are going to get added to my 1983 claim. But I also wanted to find out, how did she find out? Is there a connection? Guess what? I found one. Turns out Eugene Soar's wife is an attorney at the Office of Administrative Hearings. She sits on the Rules Review Commission, the very body that governs this petition case and the rules that govern it. Okay, so now we have Judge Dever to Yop, to Soar, to his wife, to the Office of Administrative Hearings. I mean, this is like, what, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon? But you know what? I thought in the Middle District, at least I would have a geographical distance. Like, Greensboro is almost 2 hours from Raleigh. And I actually thought that Judge William Osteen Jr. might be different, because he's a Bush appointee judge. So he probably leans, of course, on the conservative side. It means that he has a strict adherence to rules. He should be appalled by my complaint. He claimed that the harm I stated was too vague. I'm sorry, was 27 violations not enough for you? He also completely ignored the part of my filing where, of course, I asked for the court to order the release of the judge's names. Well, because of that, this gave me permission to file a Rule 59E motion, which is basically asking for a reconsideration or to correct the error that you did. Now, this was over, I think we're going on 3 weeks now, okay? No ruling yet. On a reconsideration of an emergency TRO, I have been forced to drive over 2 hours multiple times in the last 3 weeks just to file because they still won't let me file electronically. I've had to pay high fees to get it delivered through a courier or through mail, which even though I have made an ADA request because of my ADHD and I have a PACER account, because it's exhausting, because this is supposed to be the branch of government that protects our rights. But what I'm seeing over and over again is that it protects itself and each other. These judges and attorneys all know each other. They've built their careers together. They're from here. They've grown up in the area and they defend each other even when it's violating the very laws that they swore to uphold. But because of Judge Austin's delay, I was still forced to file my record on appeal for the third time. But you know what? I did it under protest, which, by the way, I made clear in writing that I was not going to follow Judge Eagle's order because it was procedurally invalid and outside her jurisdiction. She didn't even serve it properly, nor did they care to correct the service. And for the first time, the Court of Appeals actually accepted my record. There was at first no objections from opposing counsel, which I thought was strange. Like, that's out of style. But don't worry, because SOAR continued the retaliation instead, which was a huge mistake because it exposed even more. Now, when I filed, I was hit with, of course, having to pay the $250 bond fee, but I already paid this months ago. But I get the invoice with an additional $10 docketing fee. And on that invoice, it said, if I do not pay this $10 in 10 days, that my appeal would be dismissed. Now, I've gotten multiple invoices for every motion that I filed in the Court of Appeals, and none of those invoices have said this before. But then immediately after I pay this, I get another invoice for $355 for the printing the record on appeal, which, yes, is normal, but not this quickly, and stating that I had to pay it in 10 days, or again, my case would be dismissed. Okay, nowhere in the rules does it say that I have to pay this in 10 days or it would be dismissed. And people definitely don't. I went through tons of dockets. There is not consistently paid within 10 days. This was pure retaliation, which of course, again, made me want to dig further. So it turns out the Court of Appeals can only charge for what the North Carolina Supreme Court approves. They are the ones that set the charges for both courts. In this Appendix F of the Rules of Appellate Court, it says there's a $250 bond fee, and then you have to pay $1.75 per printed page. And the rules say that printing, though, only happens under Rule 12b by a court order, which didn't exist in my case. Not to mention, now by the second invoice, SOAR had been served from the Middle District case. So he knew I was seeking an injunction to stop this case from proceeding. So he should never have even printed that record. But then I noticed on this Appendix F, it says no filing fees for motions in the Court of Appeals. I'm like, wait a minute, what? I have gotten an invoice for every single motion I have filed. Like, it just automatically sends it to me saying I have to pay it. I had no reason to question it. It was coming from the court. I have paid $90 in motion fees. Do other people do this? So again, I went through and I just checked other docket filings, went through 45 different docket sheets and found that over $900 have been charged when fees aren't authorized by the Supreme Court. There's no governing oversight. There's no state auditor. So the question is, where is that money going? Well, I filed a motion asking for a refund due to unlawful fees. Guess what? They denied it again with no legal basis. I'm sorry, you're not going to give it to me back? You misled me into thinking I had to pay this. Now, I filed a formal notice of retaliation and told them I'm not paying another penny, right? Now, this just proves more harm, but thanks to their retaliation, now I have proof that you've been charging illegal fees, committing fraud, and exploiting the public, all of which is now part of my 1983 claim. But you know what? Of course, the buck doesn't stop there, because once I filed that notice with the court, now here comes Yop, out of the blue, filing a motion for sanction, trying to dismiss my appeal. First of all, he threatened this months ago. He was just served on June 12th. And now you're going to file this? That's pure retaliation. And I haven't responded yet. I'm going to wait. And if they try to grant it before that time, then they're just violating more of my rights. But I did file a motion. I filed a motion to disqualify both of him and SOAR. due to a conflict of interest and continued retaliation. This is the third threat of a dismissal on my appeals case in 17 days, not counting all the other ones prior to this. So go ahead, grant his motion based on the, I think at this point is 8 procedurally defective orders. And as for the judges' names, I haven't given up, and I'm not going to. I did file a media request as a member of the press, and guess what? Deflection, and then straight up ignored, all done anonymously. What is wrong with these people in the courthouse? Like, are you not proud of who you are? Why does it have to be under this like cloak and dagger? But that's another violation of my constitutional rights because I am a member of the press. And so if I asked for those names, they were required to give it. I even stated case law. And I also CC'd Sharon Gladwell, who is the director of communications. And of course, she didn't respond at all. All the defendants have now been served. Everyone's fully aware of my case, except for the ones that I have not added yet. You have to understand justice has existed long before civilization. The role of a judge or an arbitrator is one of the humanity's oldest professions. I mean, it began with tribal elders who resolved disputes within their communities. And that is where the system of these written laws started. The oldest record they found was 4,000 years ago. I think it's called the Code of Eugenics. Now, these laws, of course, have changed, but the structure hasn't. It's a code of conduct followed by consequences. Now, at its core, the judiciary is that it must serve the people and stand apart from power, even its own. And when it does, society thrives. When it doesn't, it becomes one of the greatest threats to humanity. Because you think that we would learn from history, but instead we bury it, rewrite it, or pretend we've evolved, when in reality, it's just repeating. And now the wheel is spinning even faster. But let's start from the beginning. Let's take Rome, right? Now, this is the first example of when the judicial system failed. Its foundation was built on justice. The 12 tables made laws public and consistent to protect the average person. But as authoritarianism crept in, the courts became tools of control. Power replaced principle, corruption spread, and the wealthy were protected while the poor were silenced, and the law became whatever served the ruling class. Trust eroded, civil unrest grew, and the economy collapsed, and the military fractured into two. Now, by 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire fell. What followed was centuries of chaos, famine, war, and disease, what is we now call the Dark Ages. Millions died as order crumbled and violence filled the void where justice once held. But fast forward to 1,000 years later, when across Europe, the church and the state became one. Courts didn't protect the people, they targeted them. People were prosecuted not for actual crimes, but for challenging authority, labeled as witches or heretics, because they held threats to religious or political power. Now, most of these people were not truly witches. It was either independent women, widows, midwives, landowners. The courts were weaponized to justify theft, torture, and execution. They state that around 40,000 to 60,000 people died. Some people say it was 100,000, but they were either burned, drowned, or imprisoned in extremely brutal conditions. And the legacy of this persecution didn't stay in Europe, of course. It spread across the ocean to the colonial states of Massachusetts and Connecticut, and it took nearly 300 years to undo the damage. I mean, even now, some of those people are just being pardoned that were killed, which my 15th great grandmother was one of them. But then came the founding of America, less than 100 years later. Now, the goal, it was to build a system of checks and balances with the Supreme Court. It would be the final word, an impartial, independent, free from corruption judicial system. Now, in theory, this could have worked. It really could have. But we branded ourselves the land of the free with that little giant asterisk. That land of free that we stole from other people. And then we decided to enslave human beings. And then the courts were used to justify it. The very system that meant to protect the liberty was being used to strip it away. So it should come as no surprise that the ruling class didn't stop there, because once America had native-born citizens, like after about 100 years, discrimination evolved into something more sinister, and it was packaged as science. Now, this is a time of Darwinism, where they found about evolution and this hereditary that was passed down, but they didn't know what it was. They didn't call it DNA. They just thought it came through our bloodlines. And it started something called the Eugenics movement, which the courts eventually aligned with. During this era, the courts imposed laws supporting forced sterilizations of those they deemed unfit. Well, this unfit was the poor, the disabled, immigrants, anybody labeled feeble-minded. Over 100,000 people were sterilized in the United States. In North Carolina, was one of the most aggressive states that participated and the very first in the South. At the beginning, I mentioned Buck v. Bell, and this was a case that forced sterilization of a young woman labeled as a moron, despite clear evidence to the contrary. These words, moron or idiot, actually comes from these medical terms through the eugenics movement. It was used in court to deem someone unworthy of basic human rights. And this case was strategically positioned to gain court of approval for the eugenics, and it came out of Virginia, which just happens to be where our Fourth Circuit Court is based. But the damage didn't end there. That ruling wasn't just a stain on our legal system, it was used during the Nazi trials to justify Hitler's own sterilization program. They actually cited this case in the trials, which impacted over 400,000 people. What most people don't realize, though, is that during the same time, the American Bar Association was also created. Back then, anybody could apply for a license to practice law, even without formal schooling. I mean, the greatest attorneys in history never went to school. Abraham Lincoln self-taught himself, and he was an attorney, and he passed the bar. But as eugenics movement started increasing, the country became more of a discrimination than a free nation, and barriers were built to keep the courts exclusive to the privileged. Despite a constitution that promised justice for all, the eugenics planted the idea that being uneducated was a defect. It was a sign of incompetence. And that's where the stigma of pro se litigants began. Because if you couldn't afford an education, then you must be an idiot. To this day, that if you ask the court to waive fees, you have to apply for something called forma pauperis, which literally means in the form of a poor person. That word, a pauper, was a name of a class of poor people that they sterilized. And that's why poor and self-representative individuals are still, like, even on a subconscious level, viewed as incompetent. I mean, it's not true. Let me make this very clear. Money does not define intelligence. A degree does not define intelligence. But to really understand the eugenics movement, you have to realize that it didn't happen overnight. It crept in over decades, echoing exactly what is happening right now in the United States. We obviously didn't learn our lesson because it started with this underground groups kind of pushing these far right ideals of what society should be and what kind of person was considered perfect. They wanted to perfect the human race, and they moved state by state, stacking courts, quietly passing sterilization laws. And that's what's unfolding again in our courts today. This isn't about due process anymore. It's about control and influence. So this is under something called Project 2025, which is the eugenics movement in disguise through religion. Now, I'm not here to push beliefs on anybody, but misinformation is very, very powerful. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss the truth. We are dealing with wealthy, conservative influencers who believe that they know what is best for the perfect society, judging others through these distorted ideals rooted in religion or straight up fiction. And if this doesn't stop, we're heading down a very dangerous path. And people need to speak up because that is how this change happens. This is how it will stop. I do not believe that I'm the only one that cares, but I do get it. I mean, my journey has been awful. I'm not going to even sugarcoat that. The only way I can explain it, it's like I'm that one kid on the playground being circled by like this group of bullies, just getting kicked and mocked, and no one steps in to stop it. Other kids are just walking by, pretending not to see it. The teachers look away because, they're friends with the parents that donated a lot of money to the school, even though, of course, they're supposed to be protecting me. And that's what this past year has felt like. And even with all of that, you know what? As for Judge Austin, I actually kind of feel bad for him. I mean, I understand that I put a huge responsibility on him. I'm asking him to issue an order to cause a collapse in public trust in the Court of Appeals, trigger mass appeals, and most likely a class action lawsuit. I get it. And this all comes at a very distinct time because guess what? The Middle District's in Greensboro. And you know what just happened in Greensboro? Jet Zero just signed a $4.7 billion contract to bring 14,000 jobs to North Carolina. Now, ask yourself, if this gets exposed, do you think that companies likely to want to stay? Do you think they're going to follow through? This is going to be a test because when this hits the legislation, they're going to have to act fast. They can't just bury it. That's why I'm doing this video. And all the evidence is online. It's in writing. If nothing was going on in the Court of Appeals, they would not be concealing and denying the identities of these judges. And let's just say I'm completely wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, right? Let's say it is judges that are acting out of their authority. Okay, I have multiple rulings like that. And judges are supposed to be randomly assigned, 3 per motion. So that would mean that the entire appellate bench is no longer following the laws that they established. I would have to name every single judge in that case. That would be me against what I think there's 11 judges. All I have to say is everybody involved in this 1983 claim, I really hope that Anna was worth it. She's the one that started all of this. So whether they like it or not, guess what? I'm not backing down. I was chosen, obviously, for this fight. I was told about it 2 years ago, and I will see it through. Because when it comes to justice, the race isn't always to the swift. Sometimes it's just the one who never stops moving.